Oklahoma's tradition was influenced by innovators that changed the sport of football as we know it. It started more than a century ago when John Hartz organized the first football team. Hart's dream was realized through the success of Benny Owen, who introduced the forward pass and became Oklahoma's first coach with more than 100 victories. Hi, I'm Spencer Tillman. The Oklahoma program is an elite family, a tradition created over the last 100 years, a legacy that lives on today. Nearly half a century had passed when a post-war roster full of talent stepped onto the Norman campus. University administration had its eye on winning championships, and under the guidance of its new coach, the Oklahoma dynasty was primed to erupt. Charles Burnham Wilkinson came to the University of Oklahoma as an assistant coach at the age of 30. He grew up in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where he lost his mother in a train accident at the age of 7. His father raised his sister Florence and brother Bill while working as a mortgage broker. The 6'1", 186-pound high school standout attended the University of Minnesota, where he led the Gophers to 3 straight national championships. He was a 2-time All-American, playing 2 seasons at guard and his senior season at quarterback. In addition, he played golf and hockey for the Gophers while majoring in English.
He was a great motivator. He was a great organizer. There are a number of different factors. First, he loved the game so very much. He used to tell us that if he had enough money, he would have paid to coach. He enjoyed the profession that much. But he was also an intense competitor. He really did like to compete. He, I think, was fundamentally very sound in his philosophy. He had learned from his head coach, Bernie Bierman, at Minnesota, where they won 3 national championships, what it took to be conditioned and to continue to have repetition and drills. So I think he had a very good background, fundamentally sound perspective and philosophy.
After graduating from Minnesota, Wilkinson landed an assistant coaching position at Syracuse, where he also coached the golf and hockey teams while pursuing a master's degree in English. In response to a class assignment, he started a weekly 15-minute radio show. The results were so impressive that the management at WFBL created a permanent spot for his show on Sunday night. After 4 seasons at Syracuse, he returned to the University of Minnesota as an assistant for his old coach, Bernie Bierman. Just 1 year later, the Second World War forced both coaches to enlist and transfer to the Navy Academy's Iowa Pre-Flight School in Iowa City, Iowa. Bierman coached the Seahawks for 1 season before he was replaced by Don Faroux. In 1943, Faroux ran his unique split T formation that earned his squad a 9-1 record, finishing the season at number 2 in the AP poll, just behind Notre Dame. Along with Wilkinson, Jim Tatum also joined the Faroux coaching staff in 1943. Following the 1944 season, the 4 pre-flight schools dissolved as Wilkinson was assigned to the aircraft carrier USS Enterprise, stationed in the South Pacific. From the stresses of war, Wilkinson wrote to his father,
"If the war were to be good enough to me that I would come back, I would not be a coach. I was certainly going to follow his lead, and that the Wilkinson Home Finance Company would be fine for me."
Dad was a realist. Went through the Depression, fought in World War II, was very fortunate not to have been killed on the aircraft carrier Enterprise when a kamikaze plane exploded on deck, and if he hadn't been standing behind a steel beam, he would have been killed himself. This obviously gave him a predictable reaction coming home. He was very grateful to be living and to be in the United States, but he was an intense competitor and a realist.
When Jim Tatum interviewed for this job, he brought along Bud Wilkinson with him. He already knew who he wanted his top assistant to be, and so impressive was Wilkinson on that interview that there were people in that process who wanted to hire Wilkinson at that time, and it was stipulated that when the job was actually offered to Tatum, that Wilkinson would have to be part of the package.
Oh, we all, Bud was a good gentleman. He was the nucleus of it. He kept everything in a smooth situation where we could talk to him transparent. We knew where Bud would be one day, and he was the type of person that gave you the confidence to perform like you should. And he had the knowledge, he had the football knowledge, and so we wasn't worried about a coach because we had one that was greater than one that we just lost.
University administrators had the man it wanted for more than a year, but the promotion to head coach did not come with any additional compensation. Wilkinson continued to honor his 4-year contract, earning him $10,000. His captivating persona stepped into the head coaching position with grace, and Bud took over a team that was laced with mature and talented athletes. War veterans accounted for 31 of Wilkinson's top 33 players and provided the young coach with much-needed leadership.
After the Second World War, that gave them instant beef. It gave them people who had experience because a lot of these guys played service ball. And there was one fellow who was a freshman came in one of those early years, a fellow by the name of Bob Bodenheimer. One of the coaches told him, it says, "Don't be afraid of those guys, get in there." And he said the guy he was trying to block was a fellow who'd been in the Battle of the Bulge and killed 20 Germans. So he was somewhat intimidated.
The team fought from behind in 5 of its 7 victories. But no victory was more important to Wilkinson's career than the matchup at Columbia against his Iowa pre-flight coaching mentor, Don Farrow.
If you'd asked me what was my dad's most important football game that he ever coached, I would say it was maybe in 1947, his first year. They went up to Missouri. And Coach Royal, at the end of one of my dad's practices, was, after everybody had gone in, punting the ball. And Dad said, "Darrell, it's time to go in. You know, you're tired." And he said, "Coach, I've got to punt the ball when I'm tired after a practice, because during the game I'm going to be tired." And they prevailed. They won the game up in Columbia and upset the favored Missouri team. And Coach Royal kicked the ball out of bounds inside the 10-yard line 3 times in that game. And Oklahoma won.
If we had lost, I am quite sure a number of Oklahoma fans would have felt that I, a stripling, only 30 years of age, was not mature enough to handle the head coaching job at a major university.
Despite the struggles of the season, Wilkinson's teams rallied in every conference game to capture the Big Six Conference Championship and finish the season 7-2-1. Oklahoma's dominance in the modern era had officially begun behind a structured and mature group that truly knew how to work as a team.
Well, I was delighted, of course, in the opportunity. And I had reservations only from the standpoint that I was young. And I knew that the people who you need to have support, the total team, they maybe, if we didn't do very well, would feel that I was just too young for the job.
We were all in the war and had got the discipline that you had to have and the dedication. And we had that authority drilled into us, because if you didn't, you wouldn't be back. You wouldn't be playing ball for the University of Oklahoma or anybody else. So it was built into us. So, Bud, we never looked at him being any younger or older or nothing. When he'd said something, our discipline's already. We knew where we wanted to go.
After the 1947 season, Wilkinson entertained and declined head coaching offers from Navy, Harvard, and Yale. With university officials failing to react, Oklahoma was certain to lose its rising star. Wilkinson was disgusted with his team's preparations for the opening game at Santa Clara, and the 2017 loss did not surprise him. Although disheartened, Wilkinson teased reporter Kurt Gowdy that his team wouldn't lose again for 3 years. Growing into his role as head coach, Wilkinson's positive attitude helped spur the team to victory. At the suggestion of players Homer Payne and Wade Walker, Wilkinson began rotating his linemen to keep them fresh. His team of veterans wiped the field clean, winning the remainder of the regular season by a combined score of 319-95. The 1948 team penned the first chapter of a historic era in college football, authored by the dominance of Oklahoma's first three-time All-American, Buddy Burris.
It's the first time that indisputable film evidence has been the basis of selections. From Oklahoma, left guard Paul Burris. Pride of Muskogee, Oklahoma, he's a tireless slashing blocker who can charge as hard in the fourth period as in the first.
Buddy, he was a dedicated player. He was gifted with a lot of ability. He played guard, of course, and he was a tough kid. But Buddy was a good guy. He was a very good guy, and he had brothers that was just as good. And they all, that family, you just want them on your team.
I was amazed at Buddy. He was a workaholic. We were raised on a farm, and I was number 8 out of 11 kids. So you learned the chain of command real early, and you know you had a duty to do on the farm, and you got to get up and milk those cows every day. And we're going to haul hay, and we're going to chop corn and cotton, and that's just part of it.
The efforts of the team were rewarded with a trip to the Big Easy, accepting a bid to play number 3 North Carolina in the Sugar Bowl. The Tar Heels came into New Orleans with the strongest team the Sooners had faced, and it showed, as their defense stuffed the Sooners' split-T rushing attack. Frustrated by a narrow, low-scoring 7-6 Oklahoma lead, Sooner fans became impatient. A drunken supporter stumbled onto the field yelling, "Gall Derned Wilkinson, jump up in the air and throw a little short pass." Wilkinson ignored the suggestion, but his play caller didn't. Quarterback Jack Mitchell followed the fans' request with an incompletion, but North Carolina backed off. The Sooners' rushing attack began to gel, and for one play, Darrell Royal switched positions with Mitchell. Royal reeled off a 44-yard pass to Frankie Anderson, the only completed pass of the game. It was enough to help secure the victory. And in only his second year as head coach, Wilkinson brought the Sugar Bowl trophy to Norman with a 14-6 victory. As the Oklahoma players carried Wilkinson off on their shoulders, it was clear that Oklahoma football had a coach worth fighting for.
Unbeaten Oklahoma in the running for national football honors, this fall is showing the power of its devastating new formation, the Split T, which last year made the team Sugar Bowl champion. What is the Split T? Let's have a look. Oklahoma shows the regular or tight T formation. Into the Split T with linemen spread farther apart. In these exclusive top views, the Sooners first show the popular T formation made famous by Stanford, Notre Dame, and the Chicago Bears. The linemen particularly are jammed together, shoulder to shoulder, at the start of every play. The red-hot Sooners huddle, and out pops the Split T. Guards play 1 foot wide of the center, tackles are 2 feet from guards, and ends are a yard outside the tackle. The defense has to spread, and that puts the pressure on the opponents. It's spreading to other schools as Oklahoma bids for the national championship.
Enrollment had tripled since the stadium's construction in 1925, and the Board of Regents voted to expand Memorial Stadium to accommodate the school's students and growing alumni base. And in February, Wilkinson lobbied for the hire of Harold Keith as the full-time director of athletic publicity, a move that further propelled OU onto the national scene. Wilkinson also employed the Regents to renegotiate the university contract with Texas. The series was set to shift to a home and away series in 1952, but upon Wilkinson's recommendation, the board agreed to keep the series at the Cotton Bowl. The Sooners' opening game of the season against Boston College was nearly a washout. The game was meant to be a special experience for all the players as they prepared to play in the Boston Braves Stadium. But a torrential downpour on the day of the game left the Braves officials in a panic. Afraid that a match would damage the field, the Sooners and Eagles were forced to push their game back one day after the Braves played their baseball game. The delay proved inconsequential as the Sooners won 46-0.
He was meticulous about mistakes. He asked me a question. I remember this specifically. He asked me in some meeting, he said, "Clinton, are you allowed to make a mistake?" And my answer was, "Coach, I'm human. I'm going to make a mistake." And he said, "Let me say it a different way. What if 11 guys on the ball team all think they can make a mistake? They're human, they can make a mistake. you're not allowed a minimum. That's 11 mistakes. And if you make 3 mistakes against Texas, you're going to lose.
Oklahoma had defeated Texas only once in the previous 9 years, and Texas fans anxiously awaited kickoff in the Cotton Bowl. When Darrell Royal fumbled in the first quarter, the crowd knew it was in for a tight battle. Charlie Dow responded by intercepting a Texas pass on the ensuing possession. Wilkinson's bold confidence could be seen often in his risky trick plays, including this fake punt out of OU's own end zone. After Texas got on the board first, Oklahoma's George Thomas responded with a 40-yard scamper. Oklahoma then took the lead when Lindell Pearson powered his way in to put the Sooners up 14-7. Behind the steady play of Royal, the Sooners controlled the game the rest of the way. Royal's beautiful 17-yard touchdown pass looked to be the highlight of his Cotton Bowl career. Although it would be the Oklahoma native's final rivalry game as a player, Wilkinson's star pupil would soon become a star on the other sideline of the Cotton Bowl.
I knew I wanted to be a football coach someday. I knew that. But I knew I had to go to college and get a degree before I could do it. All the Okies, or at least a bunch of Okies, during the Depression, went to California. And my dad was right in that line. I went out to see the football coach, and he said I'd have to be on the junior team because I wasn't heavy enough. I felt like I had no alternative then. I got to thinking about Hollis, Oklahoma. So I told my dad I'd like to hitchhike back to Oklahoma. I had $10 in my pocket, and I got out on the highway and hitchhiked back. With the old Victrola box was gutted, and that was my suitcase. And that more than handled what clothes I had.
Darrell and I came in at the same time, and Darrell had a cardboard suitcase. And I always said that. I said, man, I don't know about you. If that thing gets wet, you're not gonna have that suitcase long. He said, that's all I got. And I said, well, where are you from? He said, well, I'm down from Hollis. And I said, well, I'm from South Carolina. I said, yeah, you got any cotton down there? And he said, I picked cotton, hold cotton all my life. I said, well, I have too. I said, you come from a rich family? He said, the poorest you can get. And I said, well, you haven't got anything on me.
When an injury forced Royal to sit out the Iowa State game, Claude Arnold gave the homecoming crowd a supreme confidence that their future was in good hands. Arnold lit up the new electric scoreboard, completing all 4 of his passes for 115 yards and ran for 1 touchdown himself. The team put the new scoreboard to use when Oklahoma A&M came to Norman on Thanksgiving weekend. Oklahoma scored touchdown after touchdown on the overmatched Aggies. Oklahoma A&M made a late push to get into the end zone, but 3 consecutive stops by the veterans sealed the shutout at 41-0.
Oklahoma was just moving up in stature during the 48, 49 years. So the 49 team should have been the national champion. Those days you didn't play for it. It was named in the newspapers. 49 team was overwhelming everybody, and the 50 team, we had to come from behind some.
Of course, the football team of 49 by many people is regarded as being the best football team Oklahoma had up until these modern times, because that was the last year that the World War II veterans were on the team. And we had Darrell Royal at quarterback, and Junior Thomas and Lindell Pearson, at halfback, and Jimmy Owens and Stanley West, people that made big names of themselves in football. And they were a great football team. And coming from a little school with 26 boys in the high school class down here at OU with all those 27-year-old veterans, it was quite a switch for me anyway. But I enjoyed every minute of it.
While preparing to meet Louisiana State in the Sugar Bowl, Wilkinson received a tip that spies were watching the Oklahoma practices. Team photographer Ned Hockman joined in the efforts to intercept the perpetrators as Wilkinson adjusted his game plan to bring home the trophy 35-0. After coaching the first undefeated season at Oklahoma since 1918, Wilkinson was cited with the Coach of the Year award for 1949. As Wilkinson lost 10 of his 11 offensive starters in 1950, few expected Wilkinson to coach his team to a national championship. But Wilkinson scouted out the state's best prospect in Billy Vessels and went to great lengths to ensure that nobody in Stillwater could find his next star.
Bud knew about him, and Bud ran a football camp in Minnesota in the summer. And he knew about Vessels, and he got Vessels and took him to Minnesota and hid him all summer. So the other coaches didn't know where he was when the recruiting was going on.
Oklahoma's roster took another hit when the Korean War began just before fall practices of 1950. Starting back Tom Carroll was called to duty, and Wilkinson was forced to move Billy Vessels, a defensive standout, to offense. Only a handful of World War II veterans remained on the team, including Claude Arnold, who had first played at Oklahoma in 1942 for Dewey Snorter Luster. When Arnold returned from the war in 1946, he wasn't quite ready to fall behind center in Wilkinson's new split T formation.
I didn't feel like I fit into what they were doing, the football team. They were running the split T and they never threw the ball. Quarterback didn't, and I played intramurals for 2 years, 46 and 47. But I was kind of a hot shot in that league. And but he made it obvious that I could have my scholarship when I wanted to come back. So I came back in 48.
He passed the ball very well, but we just didn't pass much. Claude was a very good quarterback. He was an option quarterback. He got the ball from under center, ran down the line of scrimmage, and either pitched it to the halfback or kept it, or had given it to the fullback before he ever left his position. But he was a very good quarterback.
After defeating Boston College 28-0, Oklahoma was looking for its 23rd straight victory with a win over Texas A&M. The result spurred Harold Keith to tab it as the most thrilling game ever to be played in Norman.
We were behind 28-21, and we took the ball and went 70 yards and scored and missed the extra point. And we had to get the ball back and score again because we had missed the extra point, which was very fortunate because we would have settled for the tie. But we got the ball back with, I think, about 2.5 minutes to go on our own 30-yard line, and we had to drive the length of the field. And we threw, I think, about 5 passes and got down to the 4-yard line and pitched out and scored with a few seconds left. It was a great finish, but if we had made that extra point, we would have never won the game.
76,000 frenzied fans jammed the Cotton Bowl in Dallas as the Oklahoma Sooners, tops in the Big Seven, come face to face with Blair Cherry's powerful Texas Longhorns.
I think we were behind 13-7 late in the game, and we had a defensive tackle named Ed Rowland, and Texas was getting ready to punt. And Ed said later that he heard the man across from him ask the man next to him, "What is the count? When's the ball going to be snapped?" And this guy said, let's just say, it's going to be snapped on 2. So Ed, he felt like what he had heard was true. So on 2, he fired out across the line and gave OU the ball deep in Texas territory. And Billy Vessels, he took a lateral from Claude Arnold, and he bolted through the line and ran over a defensive back into the end zone for a touchdown. And Jim Weatherall, who was an All-American, was kicking extra points, and he kicked the extra point and beat Texas 14-13. That was the biggest game of the year.
Oklahoma had won 24 straight and wouldn't be tested again until Nebraska came to town in late November. Led by quarterback Bobby Reynolds, Nebraska exposed the OU defense, and the Sooners trailed at half 21-14. Responding to yet another great halftime adjustment by the coaching staff, Oklahoma came out of the locker room prepared to stop Reynolds. Robert Stevenson intercepted a Nebraska pass to get the Oklahoma offense back on the field. The turn of events gave Vessels enough room to work his magic as he went through the air for a Sooner touchdown when he connected with John Riddell in the end zone. Oklahoma completed the comeback when Rodney Crosswhite intercepted yet another pass at the 10-yard line, sealing the victory for the Sooners 49-35. Without a single loss or tie since September 1948, Oklahoma was not about to let its rivals prevent the school's first national championship. Vessels came out the gate with a 25-yard run to begin the first half. Then, a 20-yard touchdown pass put the Sooners on the board first. Another play-action pass followed. The Sooners were up 14-7, and the onslaught continued throughout the afternoon. Vessels pounded another from 1 yard out, helping to seal the game for the Sooners 41-14. After the victory over Oklahoma A&M, the University of Oklahoma was officially awarded with its first national championship.
Out on the practice field, I can still remember Harold Keith, the publicity man for OU, walking out on the field announcing that we were national champions, that OU was national champions. And you know, that was quite a deal.
Behind the leadership of Claude Arnold, Oklahoma exceeded preseason expectations with the help of All-Americans Leon Heath, Jim Weatherall, Buddy Jones, and Frankie Anderson. After waiting 8 years to assume the starting quarterback position, Arnold guided the team with a steady hand as he set the record for fewest interceptions, throwing only one in 114 attempts. Oklahoma had won 31 straight games, setting a new record for the modern era. The team produced the most balanced attack in Wilkinson's history, rushing for 2,931 yards and passing for 1,223. The resiliency of his team prompted Wilkinson's praise.
Our squad was thinner and greener than ever before. But they improved steadily, and despite their physical imperfections, proved time and time again that in the qualities of courage, spirit, and poise, they need bow to no other football team anywhere.
The fame of Oklahoma was just coming into being, but we had that a long winning streak going. I think we had lost the first game in 48, and then we won the rest of them in 48 and all of them in 49. And in 50, we lost some of our really stud linemen because they were veterans and they graduated. But we had that winning streak going, and the 1950 team was undefeated, and we had gradually worked up to where we were named national champion.
For the third straight year, the Sooners traveled to New Orleans to compete in the Sugar Bowl. Led by Coach Paul Bear Bryant, Kentucky handed Wilkinson his first bowl loss as a head coach.
Mighty Oklahoma, rated the nation's best football team, bows to unconquerable Kentucky 13-7, ending the greatest winning streak in modern times. And another year of football goes down in sports history.
In a surprising move, just 3 months later, Wilkinson resigned from the head coaching position.
One of his good friends was Eddie Childs. He headed up the Western Company, a big drilling firm, and Eddie talked to my dad about his perhaps coming to work for him. And during that particular occasion, my dad did submit a resignation letter to Dr. Cross. And my mom and dad went over and visited with Dr. and Mrs. Cross, and during that meeting, apparently Dr. Cross did persuade my dad that it would be in his best interest to remain at the university. So he tore up the letter, and my dad decided that he did want to stay. During that time also, I'm not sure which happened beforehand, but my dad had a very serious bowel obstruction, and my mom had to take him on the train to the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota. And following that operation, they learned that my dad also had testicular cancer and had to have a testicle removed. So there were occurrences like that at the time that I think probably impacted my dad and caused him to reflect on his own personal situation. But he always loved football first, and he was very grateful in his latter years that he decided to stay.
The National Guard began to pluck a greater number of players from the 1951 roster as the Korean War continued. In response, the NCAA allowed freshmen to be eligible for the first time, a switch that Wilkinson met with resistance.
I was disappointed at that point, and I'm more disappointed now. I feel that one of the problems in present-day football is that the academic integrity is not as high on the list of priorities as it should be. And I understand all of the factors of they're on scholarship, so if they want to play and they're capable of playing, we should play them and so forth. But it's a change when a boy does not have to prove his academic integrity prior to being eligible. And I think that it would be a far better rule if he had to do that, and hopefully someday in the future they will.
Knowing his roster was full of untrained talent, Wilkinson brought in one of the greatest collegiate athletes of all time as an assistant. Michigan star Pete Elliott earned 12 varsity letters as a Wolverine, playing 4 seasons of football, basketball, and golf. He led the Wolverines to back-to-back national championships in his final 2 seasons as quarterback. Wilkinson coached Elliott in the All-Star game, in which the nation's best collegiate players defeated the Green Bay Packers.
Bud asked me to come and join the staff at Oklahoma. Took me about 2 or 3 minutes to come up with the answer just because I was startled. It was a great opportunity, and there was no question that I wanted to go to Oklahoma because they had wonderful teams under Bud, and then very fortunately the 5 years I was there, we had exceptional teams too.
Coach Elliott's impact on the program was felt immediately as he groomed Muskogee, Oklahoma junior Eddie Crowder to fill the shoes of the only quarterback to win a national title at Oklahoma.
He was a great passer. We probably passed a little more then, but Eddie was I think, the leader of the team, and Billy was just the best player.
At Norman, Oklahoma, a crowd of 38,000 was on hand for Oklahoma University's opener with the Indians from William and Mary. The invaders from the east received a rough reception from the hard-playing Sooners. With a game less than 5 minutes old, he's clear, and it's all the way for another Sooners score. Watch that Oklahoma pitch out and pass play work again as Crowder flips to Silva, who tosses to Vessels in the end zone for another Sooners score. Weatherall performs, and it's Oklahoma 35, William and Mary 7. As the half ends, Billy Ballard short-circuits a desperation aerial by the Indians, Dickie Lewis, and gallops all the way to make it Oklahoma 42, William and Mary 7. And the Sooners add another tally as they down their season's first rival, William and Mary, to the tune of 49-7.
The Sooners struggled south of the Oklahoma border in consecutive losses to A&M and Texas. Greater than the loss in the Cotton Bowl, however, was the season-ending knee injury that sidelined Billy Vessels during that game. Wilkinson rallied his troops as the starback watched the Sooners tally 7 straight victories and win Wilkinson's 5th straight conference championship. More distinction began to fill the Oklahoma locker room as Tom Catlin and Jim Weatherall were named to the All-American team. A defensive lineman, Weatherall showed his versatility as the team's kicker, but it was his line play that made him Oklahoma's first Outland Trophy winner. Meanwhile, legendary Oklahoma coach Benny Owen was inducted into the inaugural class of college football's Hall of Fame alongside Knute Rockne, Amos Alonzo Stagg, Jim Thorpe, Fielding Yost, Sammy Baugh, and Walter Camp. As Oklahoma football beamed across television stations nationwide, the country saw firsthand the talented Oklahoma teams.
Down at Norman, Oklahoma, Coach Bud Wilkinson's Sooners were polishing up their Big 7 championship crown of 51 as the 52 season opened. Coach Wilkinson's outfit had to settle for a tie with the Colorado Buffs. Max Boydston became a favorite target for the Sooner sharpshooters. Here Eddie Crowder picks out the sophomore end. The pass is good for 59 yards and a touchdown.
Oklahoma moved on to embarrass Texas with the 49-20 defeat. For the first time in the history of the rivalry, Oklahomans were able to watch live as Wilkinson and his team put on a clinic, leading 28-0 after only 13 offensive plays. After recovering a Larry Grigg fumble, Billy Vessels punched the ball in for the game's first touchdown. Buddy League tacked 6 more onto the board with a 66-yard play-action catch. Texas's defense was scrambling to keep the Sooners contained, but number 35's presence was too much. Vessels baited the Texas defense time and again, setting up Buck McVale for a score of his own. Another play-action pass found John Riddell as the Sooners gave the Longhorns a tour of the Cotton Bowl turf, and the scoreboard read 49-20. Oklahoma walked off the field with confidence and went on to win 5 straight games by a total of 230-66. The stage was set for an epic matchup with Notre Dame in South Bend. 65 television stations carried the match, making it Oklahoma's first nationally televised game, as well as being the most widely televised game involving any teams to that time. Oklahoma got on the board first when All-American Eddie Crowder connected with Billy Vessels for a 27-yard touchdown. After Notre Dame answered, the Sooner defense recovered an Irish fumble. Vessels capitalized as he exploded for a 63-yard touchdown to put the Sooners back on top before intermission. Both teams came out of the locker room shaky, but Oklahoma found its footing when Vessels turned in a 47-yard touchdown run to tie the game at 21 points. When OU received the ball again, a costly turnover gave the pigskin back to the Fighting Irish, who would come out on top with a 27-21 victory. The game proved to be another historic mark of one of college football's grandest rivalries, and gave Vessels enough exposure to receive a call from the Downtown Athletic Club in New York.
Billy Vessels, it is my great honor as president of the Downtown Athletic Club of New York to present to you the Heisman Memorial Trophy for the outstanding college football player for 1952.
Billy is one of the great players of all time, anywhere in Oklahoma's history or history of football in the United States. Billy was a great player.
Dad used to say about Billy, he was the only player he coached that was both the fastest player and the toughest player. That usually does not happen.
He was the best offensive halfback I've ever seen, and he was the best defensive halfback I've ever seen.
He did play some defense. All the players practiced both ways. They didn't practice just one way. They practiced both ways, but then played basically one way.
They would put him in when things really got tough. When they just, I remember one time at Kansas in 1950. Kansas was ahead OU at the half, and they had a guy named Charlie Hogue that was a halfback, and Coach Wilkinson got exasperated and sent Billy in and played defensive halfback, and I don't know, 2 or 3 plays later, Charlie Hogue on the sideline. He never did come back. And OU finally ended up winning because Billy could turn a game around in a minute.
The success of the Oklahoma football program was setting the standard for excellence, not only on the field, but in the classroom as well. Coach Wilkinson was graduating his players at a 93.1% rate, with 1/3 of the team enrolled in geology or petroleum engineering.
He absolutely thought it was most important that they graduate and that they do go to class, and we would check on all the guys to make sure, and so if they ever got out of line, why, you'd let them know that you got to go back to class. You were there to get an education as well as to play football.
I remember when the university decided to enlarge the stadium, and my dad was showing me his new offices that were on the 2nd floor. And when we walked in, the 2 large signs read the University of Oklahoma Department of Architecture, and over that was University of Oklahoma Department of Athletics. And my dad looked at those 2 signs and he paused, and I felt he was just thinking out loud, and he finally said, "Those signs have to be reversed." He said, "It's just not right that we have the university athletic department over an academic department, and within a couple of weeks they had those changed.
Former players agree that success in the classroom fell on the shoulders of one of Wilkinson's more outspoken assistants. As Wilkinson's personality led to one of encouragement and direction, he knew that a disciplinarian was needed to instill order on and off the field. Looking within, Wilkinson hired the school's wrestling coach, Port Robertson.
Port Robertson is one of the great individuals I've ever known in my life. A wonderful, wonderful wrestling coach and a character.
Port won the Purple Heart. He was at Normandy. And my dad realized that if you're trying to be a person that's providing inspiration and motivation, sometimes it presents a little bit more challenge for a leader to also be the heavy.
You know, freshman kids were counting on going home for Christmas. And Port gathered us together and said, if your grades are not up, if you're on the doubtful list of doing good work in your classroom, you're not going home for Christmas.
If you cut class and he caught you, you had to do stadium steps, and it was 25 steps for a class cut. But what a lot of people have forgotten, and I don't know how many guys have told you this, but they had to be done under 15 seconds. So if you ran up and he clocked you, say it was 18 seconds, well, it didn't count. I'll tell you what, you start doing 25 of those, and you're not going to get them all done in one morning.
I think he was one of the real big successes at Oklahoma as well. He had a wonderful sense of humor. And he'd kid the football players about not even being close to being in condition compared to a wrestler. He was just a pleasure to be around.
The 1953 season began with another rule change. The free substitution rule was reversed, and Wilkinson responded by finding the best 11 defensive players and taught them how to play offense.
If they don't score, and this is one of his little sermons all the time, if they don't score, they don't win.
Dad, during that first 31-game winning streak, players were playing both ways. He preferred one platoon football when players had to play both ways, because he felt that it was much more of a conditioning game. And he also felt that it was more of a complete game if a person had to play both offense and defense.
So from a defensive standpoint, he picked all of us for our ability to play defense. Because again, the mentality is if they can't get in the end zone, they don't win.
After a season-opening loss to Notre Dame, the squad's trip to Pittsburgh ended in a 7-7 stalemate. When the Sooners went into Dallas for the third game of the season, nobody in the program could have predicted the significance of the matchup. As had become tradition, though, the Cotton Bowl was packed with over 75,000 fans as Oklahoma took the field and a national television audience tuned in. Wilkinson's roster was built around his team's best defenders, and his coaching strategy quickly yielded results as Tom Carroll forced the Longhorns into an early turnover. It was a short distance to go, and little time had elapsed when Larry Grigg posted the first points on the board. Oklahoma's defense continued to play tough, forcing a punt of the Longhorns to Oklahoma's Merrill Green. The burnt orange in the crowd was silent as Green ran his rivals on an 80-yard punt return. Oklahoma was firing on all cylinders, leaving only improved place kicking to be desired as it held a 12-0 lead. Texas couldn't match the stamina of the Oklahoma squad, and with the game nearing a close, Carroll reeled off another incredible touchdown, running 48 yards to Texas pay dirt. Texas was determined to finish strong, and a late touchdown with 2 minutes and 33 seconds to play left the Sooners with the ball deep in their own territory.
They were ahead 19-7. Dad decided to take a safety. The score now would be 19-9. Oklahoma would punt, and Texas would have to return the ball. And even if they scored, Oklahoma would still be ahead. Well, so Gene Callum, the quarterback, is supposed to go back and take a touchback. As they left the huddle, one of the linemen allegedly said, "If you see daylight, go." And Gene was running around trying to kill some time, and then he decided make a few yards. Well, the end result was Texas tackled them, and now they've got 1st and 10 on the 2-yard line. They go in and score, and now it's 19-14. Well, after the game, Gene later told me that Dad made up the whole story about when the lineman said, "If you see daylight, go." He said he did that to protect Gene himself, and Dad took the blame because he said they hadn't practiced taking a touchback. They hadn't practiced it again and again and again, and he always believed that you execute in a game the way you practice.
Unbeknownst to anyone at the Texas State Fair that October afternoon, the country had just witnessed the beginning of history. The Cotton Bowl became a place of certain defeat for the Longhorns, and a match in Norman was nearly automatic for the Sooners.
Hi, everybody. This is Tom Harmon bringing you the 48th meeting between Oklahoma's Sooners and the Cowboys of Oklahoma A&M. Coach Bud Wilkinson's squad is favored in this clash, and with an Orange Bowl bid tucked away in their hip pocket, the Sooners could be upset targets.
A familiar face returned to Owen Field for the season's finale against Oklahoma A&M. Former OU head coach Jim Tatum was in the crowd, scouting his former colleague and team, looking for an edge. The Sooners had just accepted an invite to meet Tatum's Maryland team in the Orange Bowl on New Year's Day. Tatum watched nervously as Oklahoma beat A&M for the 8th straight year.
So it's 2nd and goal now on the Cowpokes 3-yard line. Quarterback Jack Van Poole running the keep to the left side. He's into the end zone for the score, and Oklahoma has moved 77 yards in 11 plays. Merrill Green's point after touchdown is good, and the final score is Oklahoma 42, Oklahoma A&M 7.
Anticipation mounted as the New Year's game approached. Tatum's Maryland team was nearly unbeatable, blasting through their regular season by a combined score of 298-31. Both Tatum and Wilkinson had implemented the split T offense, an art they learned as assistants under Don Farrow.
They had a heck of a football team. They had already been named national champions. We put in, I was a fullback, and we put in a little play where we would kind of give a ride the fullback off tackle like we're going to run power off tackle play. And it wasn't real good fake, and it wasn't real good execution, but I'd bump the end to look like, oh, we messed up. And he'd roll on out, dump the football to me in the flat, and we ran it 3 times during the game, but we picked up 3 first downs. Every time we ran it in a situation where we needed to get a first. So, and we probably never made over 6 yards on a play at a time. But the timing of it was so important for us to keep control of the football and keep it away from Maryland.
While preparing for the game, starting quarterback Pat O'Neill separated his sternum, leaving Gene Callum at the reins of the Sooner offense. Callum led with great confidence, leading an incredible touchdown charge that culminated with a pitch to Larry Grigg. Breaking several tackles, the hard-nosed Grigg spanned 25 yards before reaching the plane. The play came with a casualty, though, as Callum went down with a collarbone injury, leaving the game to the 3rd-string quarterback, Jack Van Poole. The game was very much in doubt. OU entered the 4th quarter with a slim 7-0 lead when Tatum's boys mounted a rally. Oklahoma's defense was feeling the pressure, and it appeared that Wilkinson might not defeat his predecessor. After moving the ball 44 yards, Maryland quarterback Charlie Boxhold sent a potential game-tying pass toward the end zone. Grigg, who had scored OU's touchdown, intercepted the pass and handed Maryland its first shutout in 51 games. The Oklahoma faithful erupted in celebration of the program's first Orange Bowl victory. The undefeated Maryland team had fallen prey to Coach Wilkinson's guile, and nobody knew that more fully than Tatum himself.
Jim Tatum had brought my dad to OU, and when he left the next year, my dad was elevated to the head coach. And so my dad, of course, obviously understood a lot about Jim Tatum and how he thought, and he knew that Tatum, for any big game, had a tendency to send people over to the opposing team's hotel in hopes of maybe picking anything up that might be left behind, like an offensive playbook or an offensive or a defensive playbook. And so my dad and his assistants made up a fake offensive report and a fake defensive report, and they laid them all around the lobby. And sure enough, Tatum's spies came over and they picked up these reports, and I'm sure they gleefully exited from the hotel room. Well, the conclusion of that game, of course, was one of the great upsets in the great OU tradition. Oklahoma defeated Maryland 7-0 in that game, a profound upset. And at the players' party after the game, when Jim Tatum saw my dad, the first words out of his mouth were, "Budge, you son of a bitch, that wasn't your offense or your defense." True story.
Senior J.D. Roberts won every possible award for a lineman, including All-America, the Outland Trophy, and Lineman of the Year. Oklahoma's strong finish to the season had built not only a winning streak, but expectations as well.
The Wilkinson thing happened at a time, or at least my part of it, happened at a time when there was a big play that came out on stage in New York, Oklahoma. The Yankees were beating everybody. Who were the key players? Allie Reynolds in Oklahoma, Mickey Mantle in Oklahoma. So there was a lot of things going on back then that were Oklahoma. So as a result, you know, it just made you pride. You know, you had a lot of pride.
With the rise of television sweeping the country, Wilkinson began pioneering new ways to expose the greatness of the Sooner squads.
Inside Football with Bud Wilkinson, head coach of the University of Oklahoma's football team. 15 minutes of fast-moving, exciting highlights of football. The people, its plays, and its problems. And now, here's Bud Wilkinson.
Hello, everyone. It's good to be with you.
Bud Wilkinson had such charisma. He was a natural to have his own coaching show. And turned out to be, he was the first head coach in America in college football to have that kind of a show.
He would go over each game, and then he did the X's and O's, and people were fascinated with it. He showed what a 4-3 defense looked like. He showed what offensive plays looked like. It was an informative thing for people who weren't familiar with offensive attacks and defensive attacks.
Well, obviously, it was an era there where you didn't have the heavy TV coverage, and you had radio, and Bud kind of broke in the whole idea of training, teaching people on TV and all the things that he did so well in educating, I guess, the general public about Oklahoma football and about the split tee and about all the things that we were doing here at Oklahoma. So I think, at that time in the early years, Oklahoma football was really the place to be. The Yankees and Oklahoma were the two things that everybody was interested in.
Bud was like a movie star. He was great looking and glib, and I'm sure you've seen over the years the little men. In those days, people didn't really know about the split tee, as he called it, and so forth. And he had a thing called the little men, where he would line them up, and nowadays they would use moving graphics. Those days they had little men, and they would show how this play worked and why it worked. And he was terrific, just a great personality and a great coach.
The most famous of these is what we call the Statue of Liberty play. And the play gets its name because as the passer goes back to throw, he puts the ball in this position, and as we all know, the old Statue of Liberty has that torch in that position. But to describe the play for you, I think I can use the little men. As I said, the men who are in the secondary will all drop back to defend against the pass, and the pass receivers will all come down the field. So we have now the line rushing, and this one is against the defensive end. The passer goes back to throw the ball, and the end comes rushing in trying to get to him before he can throw. Just about the time he thinks that he has him, the halfback comes around, and he picks the ball off of the hand and is out around the end. The other men have rushed, and he will now pick up that open middle zone again as he moves forward for what we hope, of course, would be a sizable gain.
He did that because he could reach the fans of the school. And if you'll notice, every coach has one now because you can reach people that way. And he was just one of the first persons to realize it and did it.
25 million viewers tuned in as Oklahoma opened the season against the University of California at Berkeley. With the number 2 team in the country on their home turf, Cal fans were ready to put up a fight.
I can remember the first game of '54, we flew out to California to play University of California in Berkeley. I'd never been on an airplane. I don't think any of the other guys much had. Can you imagine this today when we get out there, the pilot comes on and says he's got permission to fly around San Francisco Bay So we can look at Alcatraz and Golden Gate Bridge and all of that. They fly. Can you imagine them doing that today?
Two tough defenses kept all scores out of the end zone for the first quarter as Oklahoma put constant pressure on the Cal attack. Stacking 8 men at the line, the Bears still couldn't hold the Sooners scoreless as veteran quarterback Gene Callum slipped into the end zone. A late fumble by the Sooners set up a 7-6 halftime score. A sensational halfback pass by Buddy Leak began the second half. Taking a pitch from Gene Callum, Leak found Max Boydston for an 89-yard touchdown to help the Sooners rally for a 27-13 victory. A Notre Dame loss that same week propelled the Sooners to the #1 ranking. Texas Christian University awaited the Sooners back in Norman, bringing a precarious 6-2-3 defensive alignment that worried OU's head coach. The Horned Frogs stifled the Sooners throughout the first half, scoring the only 2 points of the half when Leak was caught for a safety.
Fans here in Norman, Oklahoma this afternoon are sitting in almost a stunned silence as their heavily favored Oklahoma Sooners trail a gallant band of TCU Warriors 2-0. The Horned Frogs from Texas are putting on a defensive show that is reminiscent of the old days, and folks here are wondering whether or not the highly touted Oklahoma offense can get rolling in the second half. To make matters worse for the partisan Oklahoma Rooters, it has just been announced that their fine quarterback Gene Callum would see no action in the third period because of a shoulder injury. Now, whether or not the Sooners can get their offense rolling, we'll see, as it's time now to play ball.
With Callum sidelined, Wilkinson turned to Jimmy Harris, his inexperienced sophomore quarterback. Harris gave Oklahoma the spark it was needing with a 68-yard punt return for a touchdown. It was more than beginner's luck when Harris danced into the end zone the second time to put the Sooners within 2, 16-14.
And a partisan crowd here at Norman, Oklahoma really whoops it up as the Sooners now come right back into the ball game.
The thrilling come-from-behind victory was the first sign of Harris's terrific career. An accident during practice knocked out Harris's 2 teeth, but as history panned out, the teeth were the only thing that Harris ever lost.
Jimmy was a great player. Of course, Eddie Crowder was a great quarterback ahead of him, too, and they were both outstanding. One thing Bud was one of the best coaches on the field I've ever seen. He worked a lot with the offensive backs and some of the great faking that the Oklahoma teams did. He taught. He's the first guy I ever knew that had the quarterback show he's putting the ball in somebody's hands, bring it back in, and then put it behind his back and leave the other hand out to show him, I don't have the ball. And he'd walk away from it casually. And he was wonderful at that. And Bud was the guy that taught him that.
The Oklahoma winning streak continued in full force with a 34-13 rout of Missouri in the 500th game in Sooner history. Oklahoma then blasted Nebraska 55-7 to set up a meeting with Oklahoma A&M. The Aggies used an off week to prepare for the final game of the season. The annual rivalry was met with great anticipation, commemorating the 50th anniversary of the original battle at Cottonwood Creek. The consistent execution by center Kurt Burris proved to be the cornerstone for the play of quarterbacks Callum, Harris, and O'Neal. The brother of OU's 3-time All-American Buddy Burris, Kirk was in a race to become the first interior lineman to win the Heisman Trophy. And Harold Keith planned to lobby each of the 3,500 sports editors in America with a personal letter. With only 4 days to write and no copier machines, Keith enlisted the help of 2 classes of students training to be secretaries. Working on 100 typewriters in 2 rooms, the students enthusiastically churned out personal letters stating Burris's case as Keith pinned his name on each. The campaign earned Burris a close second, but the effort was a fine example of Mr. Keith's impact on Oklahoma football.
Mr. Keith was, I think without doubt, the best sports information director any college ever had. And he had a lot to do with Oklahoma having so many All-America football players. And most of all, highly respected by the people in the media. He told them, this guy is a great player. Think about him when you vote for All-America. Consider him also when you cast your Heisman vote.
Well, it was about as fine a PR guy as any school could ever have. All the press loved him. He was a genuine, down-to-earth guy. He was not what you think of as a big promoter and that kind of thing. He just did his job extremely well and was very likable.
Harold Keith did so much behind the scenes for the university. It was so very important because communication at that time, the written word, was probably maybe more important than it is today because of the importance of television today.
Harold Keith was probably the unsung hero of the Oklahoma football players for what he did for them. And it was a great honor for me as a student just to work for him.
Despite the undefeated season, conference rules prohibited teams from playing in bowl games in back-to-back seasons. The Sooners finished at number 3, even after amassing better offensive and defensive numbers than the number 1 and 2 teams. The slight came to be of little concern, as an NCAA investigation threatened to stop the rolling Sooners. The NCAA was beginning to establish its post-war authority, taking over the role of enforcement from conference leaders. 17 schools were investigated and punished before Oklahoma received a 2-year probation for rules violations.
Our 1955 team will be so new that our own fans won't recognize it.
95% humidity awaited the Sooners in their opener at North Carolina. After going scoreless in the first half, Oklahoma managed to put 2 touchdowns on the board. Using a strategy of rotating linemen, Wilkinson's linemen alternated throughout the game, allowing players to rest while their opponents struggled for a reprieve.
It was kind of an old military-like Marine mindset, you know, you got to be tough through this, you don't need water, and you might be white as snow, but you don't need any water. And it almost caught up with us in North Carolina. We played in a 100-degree day with the humidity at least 100, and we had guys at the end of the game folding up like accordions on a bus, you know, from dehydration. And it was a serious matter.
Well, what he did, he said, we've got this alternate squad. He started a 2-unit deal. When I was a sophomore, he brought me in and said, we want to run a 2nd unit. And we're going to alternate them with the 1st unit. And we're just going to call them an alternate squad. We referred to them as a 1st and 2nd unit. He referred to them as an alternate squad because he didn't care which one. He wanted us to think that the 2nd unit was just as good as the 1st. Well, we did. And to get a good effort out of us, he said, whoever wins the scrimmage starts Saturday.
Averaging 11.2 yards per carry, Tommy McDonald's smooth play diced the Pittsburgh defense in Oklahoma's home opener and gave heed to the dominance that Oklahoma exuded throughout the season. One of the staples of Wilkinson's coaching style was a unique ability to motivate his players through storytelling. When his team arrived at the Texas State Fair on October 8th with a load of confidence, Bud cautioned his troops with a parable that still sits with his players today.
This young high school boy knew of an older man that lived on a farm that everyone said that he was the wisest man in town. So this young boy takes a buddy and they're going to go challenge this man. And as they were talking to him, they just thought they would fool him because they had a cinch way to prove him right or wrong. And so they walked up to his porch. He was sitting on the porch and he walked up and they had this bird in their hand. And they said, old man, we understand that you are all-knowing and have all the answers for it. But we have a question for you. And the little bird's head was sticking out the top of the guy's hand. Is this bird alive or dead? And if the old man said the bird's alive, they'd just crush it and let it fall to the ground. And if the man said the bird is dead, they'd open their hand and the bird would fly away. But he didn't choose either one of those statements. He says, as you will, my son. And Coach used that, as you will. You know, your will is going to determine what happens in this game today. And man, that, you know, you sit there as an 18, 19-year-old guy, you know, wow, that's great wisdom.
The tactic worked as Oklahoma's defense swarmed the Longhorns' attack, keeping the Longhorns off the board throughout the match. Bob Burris's terrific play tilted the game in Oklahoma's favor, plowing through the Texas line and helping to send the score to a convincing 20-point shutout. Oklahoma continued to improve as the season progressed, evolving from a team of greatness to one of legendary status. Over the final 5 games of the season, Oklahoma amassed a combined score of 206-7. The pivotal play of Tommy McDonald was a driving force behind the powerful offense.
Well, number one, Tommy was tremendously talented. We'd run a play that maybe he took the handoff and went 15 or 20 yards. He might run 40 or 50 yards and turn around and run back and try to beat everybody back to the huddle. Just one of those kind of guys.
McDonald's contributions on the field did not affect just the Oklahoma football program, but also changed how the sport was played. His relentless hustle led to the creation of the go-go offense.
You begin by knowing that you are not a more talented team than the other team. So it goes from there that you have the ball half the time, 30 minutes, and they have it 30 minutes. So now, how are we going to win? Well, if we run 15 more plays in the 30 minutes we've got the ball than they do, the yardage gained on those 15 plays is the yardage that will result in our victory. So we believed that, and we taught it, and we really went to great pains to have the players believe it. And then we had a young man named Tommy McDonald, who was a marvelous football player, not a very big boy. But Tommy, when he was in high school, he had, since he was slight, he had adapted the attitude that no matter how hard he got hit, he was going to get back up and run to the huddle. So the other people who had hit him, they're lying around a little bit stunned, and by golly, he's fresh and he's in the huddle and he's ready to go. And Tommy was the catalyst that made the other people believe in it.
As stout as Oklahoma's offense was, Gomer Jones's defense proved to be among the best in the country as it shut out 7 of its 10 opponents, including Oklahoma A&M. A crushing 53-0 triumph at Stillwater showcased the depth of the Sooner squad. All 56 players who dressed for the game saw action. The new offense helped secure Oklahoma's 10th conference championship in 10 years and its second straight undefeated season. The Associated Press awarded Oklahoma its second national championship, setting up a rematch of the 1953 Orange Bowl with Jim Tatum's third-ranked Maryland team. It was the only bowl game of the year that featured 2 undefeated teams, and more than 76,000 people descended on Miami for another round in the classic coaching rivalry. Sports writers lauded the Sooners' depth, writing that with Wilkinson's alternating teams, Oklahoma had formed the 2 best teams in the country. OU received great fanfare and excitement upon its arrival, but when Wilkinson's troops stepped off the plane in Florida, the fun stopped.
So we're going down in 55, and I learned this later when I was coaching with Bud. He was scared to death because we're playing the same team with the same coach, Tatum, who's been here. So we go down there, and it was probably one of the hardest weeks of practice I ever saw.
Coach had said, well, let's come out and loosen up a little bit after the flight. And so there was a long traffic aisle, and it's about 50 yards wide. So he said, let's loosen up, and we started running. And we ran, and we ran. We'd been home for Christmas, but we'd gotten on that plane and came down, and we were running, and we were looking at each other, and everybody's beginning to run out of gas. And pretty soon, a couple of guys had dry heaves, and we're still running. And in a few minutes, he called us all up, and he laid out that if you do what I ask you to do this week, and it's going to be worse than 2 days, we'll win, and you won't have any bad memories. And I've thought about that over and over and over again because it's so easy to go down and have a good time. The only people who had a good time was the band and the cheerleaders.
Both teams battled for field position in the early stages of the game. After Jay O'Neal saved a touchdown at the 10-yard line, Wayne Greenlee forced a fumble in Oklahoma's favor. Careless play by the Sooners ensued, setting up the Terrapins for a 39-yard scoring drive. Oklahoma had not given up a point in 17 quarters of play, and the Sooners were stunned as they sat in their locker room at half, down 6-0.
As soon as we got in the dressing room, he said, "Sit down," which was a little different than we had heard a tone of voice. And he said, "I've never seen anything like it in all my life." He said, "They're not doing a thing that we haven't seen in the past or that we didn't practice on." He said, "The line's not blocking, the backs are running backwards." And he said, "If you don't get busy, you're going to get the hell beat out of you." You know, that was something that we had never heard. I never heard Coach Wilkinson say any kind of a curse word. In fact, that was one of his rules. You don't chew a guy out on the practice field in front of the other team members, and you don't curse on the field. And so when he said that, everybody just sat there in silence. He turned around and walked out. Never said another word till the officials came back in and said it was time to go out on the field. And Coach came in and said, "Let's go play football."
The order was given for Jimmy Harris to start the go-go offense in the second half. Tommy McDonald's 19-yard pass to Bob Burris sparked the Sooner drive. Several plays later, McDonald punched in a touchdown, giving the Sooners their first lead of the game at 7-6. When OU got the ball back, the second unit moved the ball 51 yards for another Oklahoma touchdown. Wilkinson's adjustments had worked.
In the final period, Maryland's Lynn Vital tries a first down pass. OU Aldad couldn't be sooner as he picks off the pass on the dead run, puts his head down, and he's off to the races. A power-packed and precision Oklahoma team just as national champion, and makes it 30 straight victories by defeating Maryland 20-6 in the Orange Bowl Classic.
Tatum's tired team simply had no answer for the go-go offense.
I think we ran 3 plays down there in less than 40 seconds, 3 running plays, and huddle, run a play, get back to the huddle, run another play, and it was, boy, I mean, that's hurrying.
It's just a mental attitude. I'm gonna make the other guy give before I give, and it worked. It worked beautifully.
As it turned out in the game, the second half we actually just wore them out. We were going 4 plays a minute, and since we were running a tight formation, you didn't have flankers or anything. You didn't have to worry about how much time it took you to get in and out of the huddle, in and out of the huddle. And so we flat wore them out and won the ball game.